good to know I have friends who will always stand by me when this boy meets world.
Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and welcome back to the Boy Meets World review. The last time we talked about this show, we discussed how Season 4 worked with what Season 3 established to continue building the cast. Season 5 diverges from that a bit, but just how good was it? Well, let's find out. With all that said, let's jump back into Boy Meets World and review Season 5. One of the major points of emphasis in seasons past was centralized development. What I mean by that is that the characters that were already there, or have been there, add the most to the development of the main characters and help them along the way. Mr. Feeney develops a mentor relationship with Eric, which in turn helps Eric mature. Shawn has an ever-changing relationship with both his father and Mr. Turner, which in turn affects his outlook on life. And Cory alongside Topanga change as their relationship goes through different hurdles. But Season 5, relatively speaking, is built more on the introduction of completely new characters and how those characters will go on to affect the ones we already know. The first example of the Season 5 trait is the introduction of Shawn's half-brother, Jack Hunter. Jack is an interesting character. He's framed as nice but somewhat unassertive since he'll just put up with most of Eric's crazy antics, but not when it comes to Shawn. He wants them to have a real relationship, but Shawn is opposed because Jack represents the wealth that Shawn never had. This is a major point for both characters because Shawn used to be the kind of guy that put family on a very high pedestal, and still does to a degree, despite everything his parents put him through. But because Jack is a metaphor for the life Shawn never got to live, it creates the proverbial line in the sand. It really creates an interesting dynamic, because Jack wants to look out for his little brother, but Shawn has always been more independent and thinks of Jack's help more as a handout. But even with the brothers Hunter eventually coming to an understanding, and even living together later on, an even larger part of Shawn's development in this season has to belong to another new addition. Angela Moore proves to be a great character and a valuable one over the last 3 seasons of the show, both in her own right and how her inclusion shapes Shawn. Although I did feel that more should have been done to touch upon the racial diversity that she represents. After all, the socioeconomic diversity that defines the Hunters and the Matthews was utilized a lot, and it added a lot of perspective to the series. In any case, Shawn ends up developing feelings for her, a story we've heard 100 times before, but it soon becomes clear that something is different this time. Cory tries to convince Shawn to commit to a long-term relationship with Angela, but things on that end don't work out so well to start, but eventually leads to them realizing that their feelings for each other are real and powerful. Those feelings are tested in one of Season 5's most definitive episodes, If You Can't Be With the One You Love. This episode introduced the major issue of underage drinking in the aftermath of another Cory and Topanga breakup. Cory gets a reputation for being a buzzkill and tries to use alcohol to subvert that identity. It works to a degree, but it obviously doesn't go over well with Topanga. What complicates matters is when Shawn is convinced to partake in the drinking as well, but he takes it a little further. He and Angela get into an argument, Shawn lost control for a split second, and he put his hands on her in a very regrettable way. Then it all really comes together when Shawn learns from Jack that Chet's drinking problem led to Jack's mother leaving him. The 2 most important new characters of the season end up being the ones that force Shawn to reevaluate the man he wants to be. The idea of Shawn trying to separate his own identity from his father's sets up maybe the most emotionally potent moment of the series in Season 6. To backtrack a bit, this exceptional episode regarding underage drinking was in part created by the inciting incident of Cory and Topanga having broken up about midway through the season. Why, you may ask? Once again, we find ourselves at the infamous ski lodge, a place I mentioned often during and leading up to the Girl Meets World episode of the same name. And in comes Lauren, another new character that ends up playing a sizable role in the show, even with limited screen time compared to Jack or Angela. The character of Lauren herself is kind of ideal when you think about it, and that's the whole point. Because Cory never gave any serious thoughts to other women once he and Topanga became official. A couple of bumps in the road, yes, but nothing like Lauren, who connects with Cory in ways he never thought possible. After they leave the lodge, this saga continues into the next 2 episodes, as Topanga eventually reads a letter from Lauren. Cory then decides to go on a real date with Lauren, thanks in part to some motherly advice, and decides that he cannot live without Topanga. Topanga decides to break up with him then and there, and the reasons this time are a bit more complicated, and it's genuinely difficult to discern which of the 2 is more on the right. Topanga does have a point in how she never had to test her feelings, but Cory also kind of has a point, especially since nothing he did with Lauren would be considered crossing the line. This complication is resolved by having a similar situation happen, but in reverse with the episode Starry Night, where Topanga decides to try going out with a guy named Ricky Ferris. And even though Topanga and him connect in a number of ways, the situation provides a revelation for Topanga that she too still loves Cory, thus poetically resolving their relationship drama leading up to prom and then graduation, where sexual relations are considered but both decide to wait. And then at graduation itself, Topanga proposes to Cory and the season ends on a cliffhanger. There's not too much in the way of major development or involvement from Eric, Feeney, or the other supporting characters versus seasons past, outside of a handful of singular episodes, some of which are good and others a little less so. But seeing Sabrina and Salem cross over, even for just a few seconds each, was awesome. Although I am left wishing that those episodes placed a bit more focus on those two specifically. The 5 episodes I would consider the best from season 5, in order from 5 to 1, are I Love You Donna Karen, Brothers, Heartbreak Cory, Torn Between Two Lovers, and If You Can't Be With the One You Love, with 2 honorable mentions going to Promises for handling the idea of sex in a graceful and mature fashion, and Witches of Pembroke, only because I love this girl. What can I say? I think those episodes, save Witches of Pembroke, really capture the emotional weight of the season, even if the season as a whole doesn't always optimally utilize its overarching themes. Oh no, season 5 wasn't as extensively or as interestingly tied to the previous 2. A lot of that has to do with Eric as a character already having gone through a major arc in both of the previous seasons, and thus being allowed to settle down a little bit and re-embrace his insanity now that he's in college. However, episodes like Torn Between Two Lovers showcase how Eric can balance his crazy side with his desire to help people, something that ends up defining his chosen career path later on. So even though he doesn't get as much focus here, his development is far from wasted and expresses itself in more subtle ways over the course of this season and the last 2. But the actual focus of this season is being able to grow up and create stories that embrace more mature coming-of-age topics, something Girl Meets World has yet to consistently convey so far in Season 3. The episodes that tackle those topics prove to be the best in the season and provide some of the best moments of the series, but it is a little sparse. It feels like for every one of those episodes, there's an episode thrown in there that doesn't really matter too much, or episodes like Honesty Night, which are just kind of extraneous. With Season 5 more than most seasons, you get some great peaks and some low valleys, but the low points didn't even feel consistent in tone, so they weren't just lacking, they felt like they came out of nowhere. In some cases, I really didn't mind, since we did get Melissa Joan Hart out of it, but other times, it just comes off as overly silly in a show that's at its best when it can reconcile humor and seriousness. I don't think that makes Season 5 bad per se, but I do think that outside of how the new characters impact Shawn and his self-image, Seasons 3 and 4 probably have Season 5 beat. Still, a pretty good season, but not all good all of the time, and relatively inconsistent in pushing its particular narrative forward. But as rough as it was to see Shawn drunk and Cory alone, nothing, and I mean nothing, hits harder than the emotional freight train that Season 6 proves to be. Have a tissue on standby, because when the Boy Meets World season reviews continue, we're digging into the penultimate season to discuss how good it really was. Thanks for watching.
I don't like that you drink. Call me when you don't.